everybody, welcome. Hi. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bridget, and I am a filmmaker and animator living in New York City. And I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I'm excited that you have given up some time to make some art with me. If you missed last class, that's okay. It was recorded and it is on the website, so you can go watch it. In that class, we learned how to create an animation station from our home. And so using things like boxes and books, we learned how to do the whole setup so that you can animate from home. And so my whole arc of all of our classes are learning how to create a stop motion animated film with your families from the comfort of your own home, which is really exciting. And stop motion is one of my very favorite things to do, but it's also one of my favorite things to do with kids. So I'm excited for your journey and I can't wait to see what you all come up with. Today, we're kind of working on the next step. So now that we know a little bit about stop motion animation, a little bit about the process, today we are going to learn how to write a story. And I'm going to give you guys a lot of techniques and methods to inspire really productive, effective story writing with your students or with your kids. And at the very end, I'm also going to teach you how to do something called storyboarding, which is something that all filmmakers do in order to really think through how they're going to create their scenes. So it's going to be a really fun day. I'm very excited for you all, or for all of us. And what we're going to do right at the beginning is we're going to watch a film. It's a very short film, and then we're going to use that film kind of as an example throughout the rest of the class. So I know some people kind of log in a little bit later, so I'll talk a little bit more before we start the film, just because I think it's important that everybody who can see it sees it. And so, yeah, so today we are going to go through 3 different processes. The first is we're going to learn a lot about a character and how to come up with a character, and then what we need to think about when we design a character. The next is kind of looking from a zoomed out view of what our story is going to be. And then the last thing is we're going to learn how to storyboard, and we'll also be able to look at a few examples of professional storyboards, which is also very exciting. All right, so the film we are going to watch is called Fluffy McCloud. It's amazing. It's only a minute long, and you really go through a whole journey with this cloud, even though it's only a minute long and there's no dialogue. So I think it's a really good example of how to create a plot in a short amount of time. And this film was made by a man named Connor Finnegan, and I think it was produced by Disney. So while we're watching it, I would love if you all could think as you're watching it, what is the beginning, the middle, and the end of this film? All right, so Hara, I think we're ready for it. Thanks.
Awesome. So yeah, I hope you like that movie. I think it's very fun. And I hope you all were thinking about kind of what's the beginning, middle, and end of this film. But to start with, I actually want to talk about the character. So I do this a lot with my students and with myself when I'm making my own films. And before I kind of dive into the plot, I like to think, who is going to star in this film? Who is this film about? And I think a really great way to kind of get your engines turning is to draw it. So I like to call this process character design. So we're going to design the looks of the character, but we're also going to design their personality. And so I'm going to start by just drawing Fluffy McCloud. Just a quick sketch. Ooh. My beautiful Fluffy McCloud drawing. And you can make this drawing really detailed. I recommend, if you know what materials you want to work with, maybe point it out. Maybe say something like, oh, you could even have an arrow like, this is going to be made with cotton balls, and the smile is going to be made with paper, or whatever you feel like. Or maybe this is just your jumping off point, and then after you finish writing, you think about your materials. Whatever is easier for you. And then I want us, when we're looking at our character, I want us to answer two big questions. The first question is, who is our character, right? And so let's think about this for Fluffy. What do we know about Fluffy? Is Fluffy nice? Is Fluffy mean? So I'm gonna say, I think Fluffy is pretty nice. I'm gonna call Fluffy a helper. I think that Fluffy's, some characters in our stories are helpers, some aren't. I think Fluffy's a helper. And then one more thing I've noticed about Fluffy is that he's very motivated or controlled by his emotions, right? When he was sad, he rained. When he was angry, he lightninged. And he kind of had a difficult time controlling those emotions. So I'm gonna say he reacts emotionally. I think I spelled that right. So now we have, so this is Fluffy, right? Fluffy's nice, he's a helper, he's very emotional. So the next thing that you have to think about when you're looking at your character is, what do they want? Right? And so we can think of some examples of stories. Sometimes in a story, the main character wants a friend. They want to find their way home. They want to defeat an enemy.
right? There's a lot of different things that characters want, and sometimes that changes throughout the movie. But it's really important for us way in the beginning, before we've even started thinking about the plot, we need to learn what is motivating this character. What does he want in this film? So Fluffy, I think Fluffy wants to help people, right? He wanted to help the flowers, and he wanted to help the fish, and then he was ready to help everybody, right? So I'm gonna say Fluffy wants to help others. I guess the flowers aren't people, right? So I'm gonna say Fluffy wants to help others. And so this is our foundation. That's the word, I couldn't think of it for a moment. So this is our foundation. This is what our whole movie is gonna be based on. And for this movie, maybe I would also make a character design for the man who was sunbathing. But other than that, there's not really any characters besides Fluffy. And Fluffy, I think, is the most complicated character. I think the other characters, you don't really learn very much about them. But your movie might be different. Maybe when you sit down to write your movie, you have 3 best friends, and that's what the movie is about. Then you would want to do a character design for each of those characters. So I just really want you to think about, who in this movie do we care about as an audience? Who in this movie are we going to be excited to go on an entire journey with, right? And then do the character design for those characters. All right. The next step. So we've made our character. We know who this movie is about. We know a little bit about them. The next step is I want us to think pretty long term, pretty zoomed out. And I want us to think, what is the arc of our film? What is our film going to be about? And so I want everybody to take out a piece of paper. If you're not following along with me, that's fine. This is going to be your assignment or your handout for this week. So with this piece of paper, I want you to fold it into thirds. So the way I like to do that is I kind of roll it up like a burrito, like this. And then just crease the sides. And look at that. You have 3/3, three sections. That makes more sense. All right, and then you can define your sections with your marker. And I'm sure, as you've all guessed, this is going to represent our beginning, our middle, and our end. So go ahead and write beginning, middle, and end on the top so we remember. Beginning, middle, end. Okay, and then we're gonna do this together. So what happened in the beginning of this film? What happened to Fluffy? So in the beginning of the film, we meet Fluffy, right? I'm gonna say meet Fluffy. He comes in, he has his cute little smile, he's making cute little noises, there's happy do-do-do-do-do music. So we kind of, already we know a little bit about Fluffy, or we've made a few assumptions about him, right? We assume that he's a happy guy, we assume that he's having a good day. That's what we know about him. And then what happens? And then he sees some dying flowers. And he gets sad, and then he helps them, right? So sees dying flowers and waters them. And then the same thing happens with a fish, right? He sees a fish, it doesn't have very many water, so he helps him out by filling his puddle, filling his hole or whatever was in his little pond big enough for one goldfish. All right, so there you go. So that's what happened. And then he leaves, right? Then he exits the scene, fluffing the cloud. So this is what we got. We meet Fluffy. Oh, sorry, it's kind of backwards for you all, but I hope you get the get the gist. So we meet Fluffy. Fluffy sees that the flowers are dying and he waters them. He sees that the fish is dying and he waters the fish. And that's our beginning. So in the beginning of our film, no matter what film it is, we need to accomplish two things. First is we have to meet our character. And this is the protagonist, the main character or characters that we're meeting. We don't necessarily need to meet everybody that we're going to see in the film. In the beginning, we just need to meet our hero, our main character. We need to learn a little bit about them, kind of going back to our character design. In the beginning, we need to learn all these things. We need to learn who our character is. And the second thing that we need to do in the beginning of the film is we need to set the character off on a journey. He needs to begin his journey. And so for Fluffy, he began his journey of helping people, right? He kind of exits the scene, and in my mind, I was like, oh, now he's gonna go help a bunch of people. That's what I thought. And so it's really important that in the beginning of our film, they're set off on a journey. So going back to our other examples that we were kind of thinking about, maybe the character is lost. And so in the beginning, we meet our character, we know who he is, and then he decides that he's gonna find his way home, right? That's the beginning of our film. So sets off on a journey. Okay, so then what happened next? What was the middle of our film? So Fluffy going off to help people, and then he helps the wrong person, right? He rains on sunbathing man. And then the man gets really angry. And they start yelling at each other. And then Fluffy, remember, he reacts with his emotions, right? He's very reactionary. And so because Fluffy is so sad, he starts raining harder. And then the man throws a cup at him. And then he gets angry and starts lightning and then sets his house on fire, right? So, whew, a lot happened in those few seconds. And again, it's very tied to our character design, where we know that Fluffy reacts emotionally, or his emotions are tied to his weather. And so he rains on the wrong person, and then accidentally sets house on fire. And in the scene, you know, he gets sad and then angry. And so here we go. He rains on the man. The man gets mad. He throws a cup at Fluffy. Fluffy sets the house on fire. A lot is happening. So all of this, all of a sudden, Fluffy was on his way to go through town and help people. And then all of a sudden, he can't, right? He's stopped by something. He has to deal with this issue before he can move on to finish his journey. So the middle of any story is what we like to call the conflict. So something happens, an obstacle happens that's in the path of this journey. So something happens that prevents our character from finishing their journey. So I'm going to call this conflict or obstacle in the way of a journey. So sometimes there's a lot of obstacles. So if we're using our old example of a character trying to find their way home, maybe they have a few obstacles, right? Maybe at one point they have to cross an ocean. Maybe at another point they have to fight a bear. And that's all very fair. That fits in our middle section of these conflicts that they have to resolve. But I would encourage you to think about maybe there's one really big conflict. So maybe they have a lot of these little journeys along the way of, crossing an ocean, fighting a bear. But then right before they make it home, they have to do one big conflict. They have to climb a mountain or something. So think about that. Think about what can be your really juicy, exciting middle. What is your conflict? What is your big obstacle? So then let's talk about the end. What happens at the end of the film? So I think Fluffy calms down right after he makes the house go on fire. He calms down and he kind of learns how to control his emotions so that he can reign on the house so that the fire goes out. So I'm going to say calms down and puts out fire. And then what happens? And then he continues on his way, right? He waters a lawn. I think he cleans a car. He fills a pool. I think he puts out another fire. I don't know why so many things are on fire in this town. It's a little concerning. Puts out another fire. And I think there were a few more things. But he just goes on his journey, right? He's able to finish his journey. And at the very end, he's happy. And so in the end of our film, we actually do have to accomplish two things. The first thing is we have to resolve the conflict. Whatever conflict it was, we have to resolve it, right? So for Fluffy, that was kind of getting control of his emotions and putting out the fire. That was resolving the conflict. But it doesn't stop there. If that was where the movie ended, we would feel really unsatisfied because he hasn't finished his journey yet. And so after we resolve the conflict, they have to finish their journey. So, maybe our character finally climbs over the mountain, but if the movie ended before he got home, it wouldn't be great, right? So they have to finish climbing the mountain and get back home. So we wrote a lot on our cool little sheet. I'm going to review it a little bit. So the beginning, we meet our character. They set off on their journey. In the middle, they come against an obstacle that prevents them from completing their journey. And at the end, they resolve that conflict, they overcome that obstacle, and then they finish their journey. So beginning, middle, end. So your work this week is to make your own story, base it off of your character design, and then think, what's my beginning, middle, and end? Thinking about all of the things that we talked about. Okay, our last step in the story writing process is something called storyboarding. Storyboarding, I think, is a very fun process. And the harder you work on storyboarding, the easier it will be to animate. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up a few examples of some professional storyboards. And I'd like us to look at them together and think about them. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. I'm going to start at the very beginning. All right. So this is Wallace and Gromit, which is one of my very favorite stop motion animations. It's made by a production company called Aardman, and they're great. Obviously, I'm sure everybody has seen Wallace and Gromit. I'm not sure if you have seen this episode. I think it's from A Close Shave, but correct me if I'm wrong. If you know it's from a different episode, let me know. And let's just look at it for a second. So what is the first thing you notice? The first thing I notice is that it looks like a comic book, right? It reads left to right, left to right, left to right. Something different is happening in each scene. And I could look at this and I would get it. It feels like I'm reading a comic book, right? I look at this and I know what's happening. And then I would be excited to flip the page and continue reading. Now I want us to look really closely at the difference between each panel. Why did the artist decide it was time to draw another panel? All right, and now I think let's maybe read it a little bit together. So Gromit is sitting here. He has this card that's playing music. And then he perks up. So to me, if this panel wasn't here, I wouldn't know that Gromit heard something or noticed something. And so that's why this one is here. And then we see what he heard, right? It's this little light, one that says breakfast is shining. And then we see why it's lighting up, right? We see that Wallace is pushing a button. And then we see back downstairs, Gromit is pulling a lever as a result of this button pushing, right? And then because he pulls a lever, this is what happens. Wallace slips down his bed. Oh my goodness, he gets into his trousers. And then he's sitting at breakfast. So if you are the filmmaker, you know you have to make this. You know you have to make whatever's going on in the storyboard. So we get a lot of information from this storyboard. We know that we need to make a cup. We know that we need to make a card. We need to make Gromit. We also know that we need to make Gromit with ears that move, right? Sorry, I clicked. We know that we need to make this little board. We know that we need to make his bedroom and this little button. And then we know that we need to make this crazy contraption that he falls into. So that's a lot of information. So we look at this and we know already what we need to do, how ambitious this project is for this small scene, how much time we're gonna need to animate it. We could probably tell from this storyboard. Let's look at another one. So this is from Toy Story. First we see Buzz, he's talking to some aliens. And then, this is very interesting. Then we see kind of this zoomed out view of Woody running to the vending machine. But then we see the zoomed in view, right? So these two things are the same, but me as an animator, I know that I need to make this whole vending machine, and I need to make one scene where the camera is very far away from the vending machine, and then I need to make one scene where my camera is a lot closer to the vending machine, so that Woody goes in, and then Woody's peeking out as they're talking, and I think this last panel is when they see the claws coming down. I don't know if you remember that part of Toy Story, but it was very exciting. All right, I'm gonna show you one last one. This is from a film called Paranorman, which is a really great film. It's about zombies, so maybe for your older kids if you haven't seen it yet. And it's also made with stop motion animation. The cool thing about these kinds of stop motion animations is that everything is 3D printed, which is so crazy to think about. Okay, but let's see. So first we see this angle. So the camera is facing the kids, right? And then in the next panel, the camera is behind the kids. They run into the library, and then we see it facing the kids again, and then it's behind the kids again. So I want you to look really closely and think, why did the filmmaker decide to go in front of the kids, behind the kids, in front of the kids, behind the kids? So in my mind, it's to show their reaction, right? But the filmmaker chose to show their reaction first, and then we see what they are reacting to. So first we see that Norman is in awe of something. He's really excited about something. And then we notice that it's these big doors. So that's just an option. It's just a kind of filmmaking technique that you could think about. Okay, we're gonna stop our share. How am I doing behind? Oh, we're perfect. Okay, so let's storyboard a little bit of Fluffy McCloud. So I want you to take your piece of paper and fold it this way. I always call this hot dog style. I'm gonna fold it hot dog, and then hamburger would be this way. I don't know, that's what we use. We eat a lot of hot dogs in New York. And then I want you to fold it again in thirds. So just like we did before, like a burrito. A lot of food metaphors for folding, right? Like a burrito. And then whoop, whoop. So now you should have 6 sections, and I'd like you to define them with a marker. So remember, in each panel, we need all of our information. So we're gonna go ahead and storyboard the very first scene of Fluffy McCloud. So the first thing we see is Fluffy. And Fluffy, I think he kind of floats into screen, if I remember correctly. He's off to the side somewhere, and then he floats into frame. And then what we see, and this is kind of like Paranorman, is he looks down and he frowns. So you could put that in 3 different panels, right? He looks down, or he comes in one panel. In the next panel, we show that he looks down. In the next panel, we show that he frowns. I'm gonna do it all in one panel. And the way I'm gonna do this is I'm just gonna write, looks down and frowns. I just think that I don't need that many panels for it. And then I have an arrow on this side to show that he comes into frame, looks down and frowns. But just like Paranorman, we don't know what he's looking at. We don't know why he's frowning until the next panel when we see all of these really sad flowers, right? Looks down and frowns, we see sad flowers. Then we see Fluffy start to rain, but we don't see what he's raining on. I think we know that he's raining on the flowers, but we only see him and the rain. And then in the next panel, we see the flowers getting rained on, and we see the flowers transform, right? They grow into perfect flowers. So I'm gonna say the flowers come alive, or the flowers perk up. So knowing this as an animator, I have to think, how am I going to animate flowers going from looking sad to looking happy? Maybe if you think back to last week when we did the growing, you can maybe have one flower that's kind of sad looking, and then also have a flower that looks a little happier, a little happier, a little happier, and replace it. That could be one way to animate it. But because this is in my panel and it says the flowers perk up, I know that all we see is the flowers and we see them the whole time. I know that I have to figure out how to animate that. Okay, the next scene is we see Fluffy McCloud and, oh no, wait, sorry. The next scene is Fluffy McCloud looking happy, right? The flowers perk up and Fluffy McCloud is happy. So again, this proves this is in the beginning of our film. So because of this interaction, we know that Fluffy's a helper. We know that it makes him happy to help other people, to help others, right? And so that's a very important panel to have. We can't forget that he smiles after the flowers come back to life. And then the last scene, which I think is also important, an important scene, is a zoomed out, kind of like that Toy Story, right? Is a zoomed out picture of Fluffy looking happy and the flowers, and then he goes off. And then he floats off out of frame. So in my mind, that scene is really important because it kind of shows, I start thinking when I see that Fluffy leaves the frame, I think, oh, he's probably gonna go help someone else, right? He just helped this flower and made him really happy, so he's probably gonna keep helping people. So storyboard is important for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that as a filmmaker, while you're storyboarding, I think it helps you really think through what you're going to animate, how you're going to get your messages across. And then after you finish your storyboard, when you go on to animate and go on to creating all of your characters and your props and your set, this is really important. So you know exactly what you need to animate, exactly what you need to create, and you can kind of come up with your schedule of how you're going to do all of this. Something that we didn't include, but we could include is, you know, in the last scene, there were a lot of mountains, there were a lot of trees. You could kind of draw that in. You would probably put a little more time into it, but you could draw that in. And then, you know, you got to make mountains and trees, right? So the storyboard doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be very fast sketches, just like I did. But it does have to have enough information that you know what to animate when you start animating. And it has to be used as a tool to think through your animation process. Whew, so we did a lot today. I'm going to review it a little bit, and then I'll talk to you about your assignment or your handout. So the first thing we did is we designed our character. We thought about who is our character and what do they want. And we use this kind of as the backbone, as the foundation of our whole film. The next thing we did was kind of a zoomed out picture of what our story is, right? We thought about the beginning, the middle, and the end. Remember, the beginning is where we meet our character and he's set off on a journey. The middle is when they run into an obstacle that prevents them from accomplishing their journey. But in the end, they resolve their conflict and they finish their journey, right? So beginning, middle, and end, very fun thing to go over. And then the last thing we did was we storyboarded, which is a very zoomed in version, right, of this, right? Because we took this whole storyboard just to accomplish like these 2 bullet points. So your assignment or your handout for today, I want you all to do your own story or your own character design. Think about a character that you want in your film. Figure out what he's going to be made out of, what he's going to look like, and who they are and what they want. Then I really want you to think through the beginning, middle, and end of your film. I really want you to think through it because it will help you to know what your film is going to be about, but it'll also help you to have something to reference back to as you continue your filmmaking process. And then I want you to choose one scene and storyboard it. And if you are having so much fun storyboarding, storyboard as much as you can, but at least do one scene. So that is my assignment for you all, or the handout that you'll see. And if you join us in our next class, I'm going to teach you how to make puppets and props and sets and how to make them with animation in mind. So how do you make them knowing, or how do you make them so that you can animate them, so you can work with them using stop motion animation. And then in our last class, we're gonna put it all together. We're gonna figure out how to finalize it all so that you have a completed film. Amazing. Okay, so that was my class. that's all the information I wanted to give you all today. So I would love to hear any questions that you all have. I know it was a lot of information. We learned a lot today. So go ahead and pop your questions into the Q&A. And if you need help with questions, I have a few like frequently asked questions that I get a lot that I'm going to go over. First, I'm going to take some coffee. Okay. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about dialogue, because Fluffy McCloud did not have any dialogue. In this class, we didn't talk about script writing. We didn't talk about adding in dialogue. Here's my perspective. I think you can make a really effective film without dialogue. I think that animating mouths moving, animating with dialogue in mind, is something that's fairly challenging. I think that it's really fun to do, and it's really exciting to explore and learn how to do it. But maybe you can save that for your next film. Maybe save that for after you get a little more comfortable animating. That being said, if you are really excited about dialogue, really want to put it in, I say add it to your storyboard. Or even add it to your beginning, middle, and end, and kind of say, this is when this character is going to say this is when this character is going to say that. And then animate it all, and then I'll show you in the last class how to put the dialogue in. And just know that it might not be perfect with the mouths moving and everything. Another really great thing that you can do if you don't want to do the full dialogue, which also, another thing that's challenging with dialogue is you have to be on, you have to animate a character for a very specific amount of time, right? If I'm gonna say, hey, how are you? That's about, 2 seconds. So that's 24 pictures. So that's a lot to think about. And oftentimes what I've noticed is we'll be filming with dialogue in mind, we'll be filming, and then when we try to put the dialogue in, there's not enough footage for it. And so that's pretty difficult. So I say, animate it all, and then put the dialogue in. Afterwards, and say it as quickly as the film goes by. Another great way that you can kind of add in your voice is with sound effects, which is really fun. There are kind of sound effects in Fluffy McCloud, right? There was crying, there was a lot of when they were mad at each other. But you could also do sound effects like the lightning kind of made a sound. You could do that with your voice or with paper or something. And another thing you can do is add narration. So maybe you do your whole film and then you go over and narrate it and tell us what's happening in it. So that's my note on dialogue. So I didn't want to spend very much time on it because I do think it's a pretty advanced thing to do with stop motion. And so I would recommend really thinking through those obstacles. But if you're ready for it, you're ready for it. All right, I have a question here. Oh, such a wonderful question. Thank you, Miriam. This question is, does it have to be one main character? And what kind of is the number range of characters that are typically included in an animation? So definitely does not have to be one main character. If you want more main characters, great. I recommend doing a character design for each main character. And I would just really think about the materials that you have available. Are you going to be able to make 5 main characters? That's kind of a lot, right? But maybe you can make 2 or 3. Just think about, what materials you have access to. And then think about time. We saw Fluffy McCloud. That probably took a lot of work to create Fluffy McCloud, and that was only one main character. So when you're thinking about how many characters you want, I would recommend thinking about the time and work involved. That being said, also think about how many animators you have. In my classes, you know, if I have a group of kids that are all so excited to animate with, and there's 5 of them, I might say, let's have 5 main characters and each person gets a main character, right? It's kind of an easier way to think about it. So sorry, that wasn't a fully complete answer, but I would recommend thinking about, you know, how many kids are you animating with? Are they each, you know, willing and able to take on the role of a whole main character? Great. Then have each of them do their own main character. But, you know, maybe you have a couple kids who are really invested in the main character and a couple kids who are more excited about the sets or the animation process. And so, yeah, so I think that one main character is good for one really invested kid. If none of your kids are that excited, then I would say get all of them to make one main character together, 1 or 2. Sorry, I hope that answered your question. That was kind of a wavering answer, but it really just depends. Okay, but kind of going off of that question, another question that I got last time was how many scenes are realistic to make, and also what qualifies as a scene. And so in my mind, I think a scene is a location or a really big event. So in my mind, Fluffy McCloud, the whole part with the flower, that was a scene. And then he moved, right? He zoomed on and did the same thing with the fish. In my mind, that's 2 different scenes. They take place in 2 different locations. Yes, the locations are really similar and the set was probably the same with a couple things rearranged, but still, in my mind, it's 2 scenes. And then the next scene was the house, et cetera, et cetera. So when you think about how many scenes you want to do, think about how many sets do you want to make. Are you going to be able to make 8 sets? That's a lot. But maybe one of your sets is really simple. It's just like a cloth or a piece of paper. Then maybe you can make more. I would recommend at least 1 scene for the beginning, 1 scene for the middle, 1 scene for the end. At the bare minimum, right? It has to have 1 for each. I would say at the maximum, 10 is pretty ambitious. So I would say maybe 8 is a good max. So try to create your story between 1 and 8 scenes, or 3 and 8 scenes. That being said, I do think that it's the role of the adult, the role of the parent, to rein in the ideas. So I think that oftentimes we have these like really amazing, lofty, ambitious ideas, which is really great. But I think it's your job as the grown-up to just really think about what materials do I have, what time do I have, and then based off of those things say, this is a really great idea, let's do it in 5 scenes. So I would say your job is really to rein in the ideas so that you can make a really accomplishable movie, right? We want to set everybody up for success. And they'll be more successful if there's a realistic amount of scenes to do. Okay. The last FAQ that I have is about storyboarding. So I think that a lot of times, whoops, sorry, I did something crazy. A lot of times I get some pushback from kids about storyboarding. You know, some kids love it and they just go off and I'm like, whoa, you just made 20 storyboards. How did that happen? But it's very detailed work. And so sometimes there's a little pushback. And so I get the question a lot, like, do animators really storyboard every single scene? And the answer is yes, they really do. For you all, of course, I think it's a really important process to work through. I think it's an important thing to try and do successfully a couple times, just so that you can think through it. But then after that, I think that you'll really know what things you need to storyboard to think through your process and what things you need to just sketch out a little bit, right? So you'll really learn how to use the tool to your advantage. That being said, I really recommend you go onto YouTube or whatever video site and look at some behind the scenes of Wallace and Gromit. They have an amazing amount of behind the scenes footage on YouTube. I don't know why. I think that BBC must have done a few like specials with them. But they show you their storyboarding process and it's so incredible. They have these like huge whiteboards and they'll have like 8 in a row, and on each whiteboard is like 3 hours of filming that they need to get done. And so they have their storyboards lined up on these ginormous whiteboards and they have their whole production schedule and they kind of take you through that process, and it's really intense. But it's also really inspiring to know, you know, it's really validating that you're going to do so much work before you even get to animating, but knowing that that work is important, knowing that the more time and the more thought you put into this beginning work, this pre-production work, is going to make your animation just that much better. Whew, okay. I think I got a little bug bite on my chin. Do we have any more questions or thoughts? Let's see, we talked about dialogue. We talked about what we're going to do next class, right? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Also, you know, if you are kind of struggling with coming up with your own story, I recommend looking at, you know, we saw that Pez animation last week with the spaghetti, right? Western spaghetti. I would recommend watching that again with your kids and doing the same thing, doing like a beginning, middle, and end with them, or doing a storyboard with them. You know, with Western spaghetti, there wasn't really a conflict, right? The plot is just get the ingredients, make the spaghetti. There's not too much of a journey, but you could still kind of write it out. Or maybe just find one of your favorite movies or TV shows that you all love to watch together and sit down and do the beginning, middle, and end exercise. And then that might inspire some thoughts. Or storyboard it so that you can like really get into the groove of practicing storyboarding. It's definitely an art form that you have to master. And, oh, I wanted to mention, so I think the link is still live that you can put your students' work in. So for this week, obviously you're not going to be making any videos that you can put in, or maybe you will, and you can put those in there too. But I would really love it if you could take a picture of the storyboards, or even if you decide to write a script or the beginning, middle, and end, or character design. If you could take a picture of your kids' work and put it on that link, that would be so exciting. Because it's also so much fun to look after you've finished your film, to look back at your process of what got you there. I always love looking at that. So if you want to, you can take a picture and put it on the website so we can all see it. All right, any more questions? We can stick around for a couple more minutes to see if you all have any other questions. I know last time I did this class, there were a lot of questions, so I don't want to leave before you all have a chance to ask. I think another thing to think about with the amount of characters that you're having is if there is kind of an enemy character or an antagonist kind of character, I would really recommend doing a character design for them as well. Again, you don't necessarily have to meet them at the beginning of your film, but I think it's important to have a little bit more of a well-rounded antagonist. I think that just makes for a better film. In Fluffy McCloud, I would say the antagonist was the sunbathing guy. We didn't know too much about him, but I think we knew enough, right? We know that he loves sunbathing, that he's really quick to react, that he gets really angry, and knowing all of those things. And I guess what he wants is to continue sunbathing. And so knowing all of those things, we're able to let that scene play out, right? If I was writing that character before I wrote that scene and I knew all of that, when the scene came, I know, yeah, he's gonna throw a cup at Fluffy. So yeah, I would just recommend if you're going to have an enemy or an antagonist to do that character design, even if you just do it briefly. Just let me know, what does he want? Or what do they want? And, one more thing about dialogue before everybody goes. I'll go over this in detail in the last class, but you can record your dialogue first and then animate like listening to the dialogue. Again, I think that's a great technique maybe for your next film because it's pretty challenging to do. But if you want to do it, go for it. But there's also an easier thing to do is create your animation. And then when you record dialogue, you'll be watching the animation as you're recording kind of in live time. So it's really intuitive and it's a really easy process. So I don't want to discourage you from dialogue, especially if your kids are excited about it. Of course, you should, we should be encouraging that excitement. But, it'll be easy to do. It's easy to do with the software that you all are using. And we'll go over how to do that in the last class. So yeah, so that's something to think about as you are writing your story this week. Just think about kind of that process of how you would add the dialogue or the sound effects in as you're writing it. But again, if your kids are more excited about the dialogue part of it, then go ahead and write a script or write, what each person is going to say and then base your storyboard off of that. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want to keep your expectations a little bit realistic because it is difficult to do. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to see you all next class. I hope I get to see some of your students' work. And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Fatima. Thanks so much, Hara.